firstly, were there some particular problems in engaging experts? And secondly, and probably more importantly, were there situations where expert opinion and public opinion didn't quite gel, and how was that worked out?
What we found, it was the experts themselves that were telling us that our regulations weren't good enough, and they were keen to be involved. So we had a receptive audience by going out to get them. And we get to our customers through the experts as proxies. So if you're buying and selling a house and you register it with us, then you need to use a solicitor. So the solicitor in that case is the expert, and likewise with surveyors and valuers. And we certainly found that bringing them in and them being able to talk to us, give us the benefit of their expertise, seemed to be fine. We haven't gone out as far as to survey the public and to see whether the experts are telling us anything that the public don't want done. But as far as we can see, it seems to work fine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Tony Cursius from Queensland Transport and Main Roads. This is obviously a very challenging area, and I'm wondering if the panel could comment on how they manage the issue of raising the expectations with the citizens and the customer base that you're dealing with as you go through this process, if in fact those expectations aren't able to be realised because of some of the budgetary or other implications, right through to government's preparedness to actually deliver on some of the proposals that might emerge from the process.
Can I'll give one view, and maybe one of the others might chip in as well. But I don't think it's so much about meeting expectations so much. It's about understanding what your citizens or what the customers want and some of their needs, whether they're articulated or not, and then being in a really informed place. Most of the time when we introduced this in an organisation I was responsible for, in Inland Revenue and in a couple of others, as one of the other speakers said earlier, people are really pleased that you've come out and talked to them and sought their input, and they often don't expect all of their expectations to be met. They expect to be listened to, and some of them to be met, but it's more about that than ticking them all off, if you like.
Yeah, I'd certainly reiterate that, because it's all about good process. If you're going out to the regulated communities and the citizenry, you've got to have good process to contain that. And if you're consulting, it's very much about going out there and listening to people, but you don't have to do everything that they say that they want you to do. You've got to have good process to balance that expectation. But at the end of the day, the test of consultation is to listen. You don't necessarily need to act on all of that material.
Yeah, I think the general principle that we would apply is that we are in the process of balancing what is desirable from our service users, our customers' perspective, with what's possible, and what government policy will allow, what cost will allow, and what's viable from our systems and technology perspective as well. So we have to make that balance. But also, I think our general approach with these things is, first of all, as Jim says, we want to understand the people who use our services much better and understand the worlds in which they live in, and therefore create services which are better tailored to their worlds. So that's our primary motive. And then beyond that, in a co-design sense, if we were wanting to redesign or change or improve the service, we'd want to bring them into that discussion and be open and frank with them about those other issues, about what's possible, what we can afford to do, what may not be possible. And I think our experience of doing that so far is that openness and honesty with service users is recognised, and they understand that not all of their expectations can necessarily be met.
Question down here.
Angela Tidmarsh, New Zealand Families Commission. One of the speakers earlier today mentioned that a very broad consultation was good for understanding the problems, but that you needed a deeper, more intense consultation to help identify the solutions from a citizen perspective. Did you find that with your, for example, the homeless example there, that the people you were interviewing helped identify the solutions to those bottlenecks in the service delivery?
In some cases, yes, although we didn't really set out to ask them whether they had solutions for some of the issues. But sometimes they would volunteer those things, and we've tried to represent that on our visualizations by little light bulb moments where service users have said to us, well, I don't understand why you're not doing this, or wouldn't it be better if you were doing that? So we have collected those sorts of suggestions, but I think I think it would be another stage. There are more stages to this process. So, for example, one of the things we need to do is to go and validate some of these journeys, go back to those customers and other customers and say, look, does this seem right? Have we got it right? Did we hear you correctly? Did we understand what you were trying to tell us correctly? So that sort of verification and validation. And then there's a third stage, which is about actually inviting them to the table and saying, do you want to help us make it better? And at that point, I think you're likely to get those ideas that none of us sitting in the bureaucracy would have thought of.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that as well, you've got someone sitting too along from you who's got a phrase about qualitative research. It's a slide I skipped over, and it kind of backs up one of Christian's point. David said, we went out and we talked to 30 people. Christian said 7 to 8. And John often says, you know, if you walk up a set of stairs and one of them squeaks, it's a squeaky stair. So the insights you get from going out are often the ones that trigger off a shift or a new idea, and then you can go out, as David just mentioned, and validate that. So you're kind of listening for insight, and then you're kind of listening for validation at the other end. So just different modes of listening, really.
Thanks, John. John Warner, ANZSOG. Trying to link different sessions together, one of the things that Christian Basson said this morning was that staff in agencies did not necessarily object to feedback, input, suggestions from clients and users, but they often objected to the impact on their organisation once it was sort of internalised. In other words, a kind of cultural gulf between what clients want and what agencies are prepared to deliver, and he said this was the biggest management issue, taking that forward. I mean, was that your expectations? Was that your experiences? And if not, why not? I certainly didn't sound it with James's.
Yeah, that's certainly a constant battle. We're an organisation which both have a regulatory side and an operations side. So in the very early days, we had a huge amount of time and effort put into actually getting the organisation to sing from the same song sheet. In fact, a lot of the pushback we got early on was from the operations side of the business. And they often turned on us and said, your regulations are still far too prescriptive. You're saying as little as possible, as much as necessary. It's as much as necessary. Some of our biggest battles were internally. And we certainly found that before we went out and engaged with the externals, is we had to get agreement internally, because nothing worse than having an expert committee and having the agency people fighting in front of the externals. So we learnt that lesson from bad experience, unfortunately. And once we learned that, we made sure that we got everyone inside the building on side, and then we went out to do that further external engagement.
And can I'll just add to that? I mean, from a previous life, I'd say once whether it was my team or my peers really understood that this is going to impact their grandma, their daughter, their son, themselves, their wife at some particular stage, and you could actually stand them in those shoes, and there's ways we did that, no, internally people got it. There might still have been that change challenge as they move through, but if you communicated really well and they got that the need, then I've always been impressed by that public service ethic that exists in all the organisations. So, yeah, not too much of an issue.
Yeah, we have a question here first and then another one up the back.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Roguski from the Department of Building and Housing in New Zealand. I've got a question. A lot of the stuff we've been talking about is providing new service or new ways of things, but given the shrinking state and we're all getting broke, do we have a different approach for when we're going to engage citizens about when we're taking stuff away? You know, like, you're not going to have it anymore, but how do you kind of like take a policy, take it away from them, and then kind of like bring them back and kind of make that process easier, or the transition easier? Do you do a similar sort of process, or is it something different? And, you know, similarly, if you've got really quite an economic objective, like this is just going to be cost savings, but we want to cause the least harm possible, it's going to hurt, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't hurt as much as if you did it a different way. Or do you just follow the same sort of methodologies?
If I could just answer that in terms of what's happening in the UK at the moment. So I'm from the UK, and obviously everybody knows that the UK is suffering particularly still from the global financial crisis, and the public sector is bearing a lot of the brunt of those economic cutbacks. And in fact, a lot of this work around redesign and redesign of services with the participation and involvement of those who use them has, I think, to some extent strengthened in the UK during this period rather than lessened, because I think what people have realised is that we need to think about the way in which we deliver services differently, and we need to not only find efficiencies, but actually bring the general public, bring service users with us in those decisions about where the cuts are going to happen and what impact that's going to have on people. So I think I think the context in which you describe probably lends itself just as well to the involvement of customers or service users in redesign, as does an environment in which we have new money to spend, or we have new ideas to bring in. And of course, in an economically foreshortened or constrained environment, it doesn't mean to say that we can't have new ideas. In fact, we probably do need new ideas still.
One last question on the back before we turn over to the discussion.
Don Munro, New South Wales DBC. Thanks for your talk today. What came through was it sounded like citizen feedback and involvement is a one-off thing, and you use it when you're just redesigning a service or a program. Some of the most interesting models I've come across have it built in. It's a continuous feedback loop, so that when services are provided, you find out how quickly they were provided, or you're getting continuous feedback on customer satisfaction rather than customer satisfaction or whatever. I'm wondering if that's being done in both the lands, New Zealand, or your comments generally.
Just a quick answer, yeah. So apologies if we communicated that. I didn't follow my notes, and in my notes I had something along the lines of it's not binary, it's not on or off. It's something you do all the time, and some of the smarter departments are using websites, are using Apple apps or Android apps, Facebook. There's some really interesting ways to get that feedback continuing. So I totally agree. It is something that technology, and not just technology, but really the intent to seek. And I actually, it's not really feedback, it's engagement and contribution. I think feedback's not the right term, and if you've got the principle of engagement and contribution, then it'll flow through all of your processes. And one of the biggest challenges is getting your organisation in a place where they're comfortable with listening to that feedback and engaging. That's one of the barriers that's often interesting for organisations to first jump over.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we do take continuous feedback. It's almost like Sydney Harbour Bridge. We did the rationalisation of our regulatory documents, and as soon as we got to the end, you had to start taking, we'd collected feedback throughout that process, the ones already published. We continued taking feedback. And you've got to be receptive to the environment, continue to be receptive to the environment. So the Christchurch earthquake's a point in case. where the surveyors down there suddenly found the earth had moved. They'd been out there and did some field work, and the earthquake happens, the earth's no longer the same.